Well, I think that conversation perfectly tees up our next conversation here with Institute for Sustainable Communities. And, when we look at climate justice and supporting particularly community-based and women who are at the forefront of this, it's really hard for them to access a lot of this funding, a lot of the federal funding, which really isn't set up for small community-based organizations. So I'm really excited for us to spotlight some work that EPA and ISC are doing to make that funding more accessible to small groups that are often left out of more larger federal funding packages. So I'm really excited to introduce Rebecca Kaduru, who is the president for the Institute for Sustainable Communities, and Dr. Earthea Nance, who's the Region 6 administrator from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So thank you both for joining us today. So Rebecca, I'd like to start with you. So ISC was one of 3 environmental justice thriving communities grant makers, which is a program under the EPA that is all about trying to make grant funding more accessible to small community-based organizations, those who typically don't have the large business development teams to turn out these big proposals that are typically required from large government donors. So can you talk a little bit about that process and how you're seeing it be able to make this funding more accessible?
Yeah, sure. And I want to talk not just about the environmental justice grant-making program, but the Inflation Reduction Act as a whole, which, the current administration has done something really unique and put Justice 40 requirements on the funding, which means that 40% of all the Inflation Reduction Act funding has to flow through to communities that are, classified by the EPA as most vulnerable to climate change, which I think is just something that's really innovative. In terms of grant making specifically, so we're one of 3 national grant makers. There's also 9 regions.
There's 10 regions.
10 regions, and each region also has a grant maker, and those are $50 million contracts. And so what the EPA has done is something really unique, which has decided, they said exactly what you said, small community-based organizations don't have the capacity to both apply for and report on federal funding. And so they have put intermediaries there, and they've done something, really great, which is layer that with technical assistance as well. So there are 3 national technical assistance providers. That program has an acronym called TICTAC, Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. And there's 10 regional TICTACs as well. And so community-based organizations can both apply for smaller bits of funding. The idea specifically is, organizations like ISC, we're really trying to set the bar low for what that application process and what that what the requirements are for reporting, so that community-based organizations can access that fund. There's also a specific pot that is a non-competitive fund, so will be for organizations with very low capacity. Those grants range from $75,000 to $350,000. And that's the point, is to get the money into the hands of communities that wouldn't be able to access federal funds if they were having to service that grant directly for the federal government.
Great. And Earthea, I'd like to bring you in. And so what are some of the barriers you've seen to be able to enacting more access to funding, and how are you seeing these programs being able to overcome those?
I think the biggest barrier has been the lack of funding. So right now we have the most funding in history that we've ever had under a policy of environmental justice, of jobs, of wanting to kind of rebuild our infrastructure, which we had not been investing in for so long, and then also kind of the climate transition. So all of that, those ideas are in the money that we have. So we have more money, and then we have it kind of in 2 big pots. So there's the infrastructure, like the bottom line infrastructure, so roads, bridges, dams, new EV centers, batteries, solar, all the big stuff is in the bill money. And then kind of the localized, smaller things that communities can do, the types of grants that they now have access to are under the IRA, which was just very well described. And so for the first time, there's billions of dollars available to communities. And it's aligned with training and help on how to write the grant. And if they don't get the grant, help with rewriting that grant to make sure they get something. This has never happened. So they do have access.
Rebecca, maybe you can share some examples of some successful programs that have come out of this.
Yeah, so most of them are just kicking off. So I want to just, for everyone in this room, this is historic funding. It's never happened before. And it's taking some time to roll it out. So, speaking of the Northeast, since we're in New York, Region 3, which is just south of New York, Pennsylvania, and neighboring states, just launched their grant application last month. Institute for Sustainable Communities and the Region 2 grant maker, which is Fordham, will be opening their applications November 1st. So we don't have a lot of data yet, but we are seeing, for example, there was a pot of money that just came out through the EPA called the Community Change Grants. Those are just going out now. And so I want to clarify that because we get a lot of people who reach out to us and say, hey, I read a press release about, the Inflation Reduction Act a year ago, and it said funding was coming out. Did I miss it? And you haven't missed it. So I think a message is, as Earthea said, the funding is a lot. And if we don't go out and get it in the next 2 years, it goes away. It recycles back into the federal budget. And so it's just starting to ramp up now. And, a year from now, we'll have some really great examples. But
and what are you looking for?
So, I think it can really fund a lot. But I think one of the things that ISC, we are both a technical assistance provider and a grant maker. We're really trying to encourage organizations to think very strategically about this. There is a lot of funding hitting the market. A lot of people have heard about the greenhouse gas reduction funds. I've seen lots of sessions about that. Those still have the Justice 40 requirements on them. And so the green banks that are giving that money, we're really working with them and trying to push them to think, okay, I need to give some of these loans to communities. How do I do that? And we, ISC and the environmental justice grant makers, we have great grants that communities can use for whatever they need. And we're really encouraging people to think, how can you leverage that grant funding to de-risk some of these other pots of money coming down the pipeline, whether that's the greenhouse gas reduction funds, solar for all, a lot of the infrastructure money, getting a $250,000 grant to do your planning and your feasibility study for solar, or even register as a 501c3 so that you can become eligible for some larger pots of funding. Really, you can do anything with it as long as you can show an environmental justice need in the community. And we're really encouraging people to think of the full capital stack of what is out there with the EPA and to utilize these grants as a way of leveraging and de-risking some of this, and billions are coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and this challenge of being able to get funding to small local organizations and community-based organizations is not unique to the EPA. This is across the government, and many people in the room work with other agencies like USAID and grappling with some of these same challenges. So, Earthea, what would be your advice on how this could be scaled across other government agencies to make federal funding more accessible to small community-based organizations?
Mm-hmm. So it's not just EPA that has been receiving bill money and IRA money. So, for example, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, and so the same ideas that we're using in EPA, they have as well. So, for example, my colleagues in Department of Energy have created community benefits agreements around grants that they're giving out for energy, for infrastructure, to make sure that communities receive some benefit there and that they have a role and a say in what happens. So that's their version of Justice 40. And just to want to put on the table, I'm at about 75% of Justice 40. So we're way beyond the 40% in my region.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
And quickly in closing, how can, if there's somebody in the room that's interested in accessing some of this funding, where could they go to learn about it?
Yeah, I believe we're going to have a QR code at some point that has
Yeah,
some
there are some on the table, so that must be, yeah.
links.
Yep.
But I'll share a story just really quick. Was that my daughter's school? I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Was sent an email out to parents saying, "Hey, we're raising $100,000. We're trying to put in a composting system." And I did a quick Google. I said, "Okay, Tennessee." EPA, IRA, composting. And something came up and it was said, Region 4, which is the South where we're based, had just opened a waste management fund for schools. And just even as simple as Googling something
Wow,
that
okay.
simple, I was able to say, hey, by the way, 3 days ago, this window opened. It closes October 31st. You can apply for up to $250,000. And here is the contact for your local regional technical assistance provider. And so I think even just encouraging community-based organizations to really pick through the resources and reach out to your local TICTAC. ISC can help refer you to the TICTAC, but there is so much investment that's gone into technical assistance. I think it's really big that the federal government recognized that we can't just put grants out there, but we have to actually help community-based organizations access them. I really think leveraging those technical assistance resources and digging through, grants.gov, you can really find, there's a lot. I'm surprised at what I find out there, so.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, Earthea, and to ISC. Learn more about some of these resources. Again, you can follow the QR codes on the table. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.